For months we've been watching a legal chess match unfold between two of Hollywood's most closely guarded public figures. Blake Lively, America's curated golden girl with a polished reputation, and Justin Baldoni, the actor-director-activist, who shattered the industry's silence when he took his allegations public. The battle has been brewing behind the scenes in legal filings and back-channel negotiations. But today everything changed. Why? Because Justin Baldoni showed up in person at Blake Lively's deposition. Let that sink in. This wasn't a PR stunt. This wasn't a leaked video. This was real. Justin Baldoni walked into the courthouse quietly, calmly, confidently, and took a seat in the gallery. As Blake Lively was forced to answer questions under oath for the very first time, no filters, no publicist-approved statements, no soft focus interviews, just Blake, just questions, and just truth, or at least her version of it. The silence in the courtroom said more than any headline could. As Blake sat at that table flanked by lawyers facing questions that pierced through months of crafted denial, Justin sat nearby watching. Not speaking, not interrupting, just listening. And the impact was immediate. Sources inside the courtroom say Blake visibly shifted when she realized he was there. The mood in the room froze. And from that moment on, the deposition was no longer just legal, it was personal. So what was revealed? We now know that Blake was confronted with evidence she never expected to surface: internal memos, media correspondence, and even text exchanges with unnamed entertainment journalists that could completely flip the narrative she's tried so hard to control. Questions were asked about her alleged attempts to manipulate public perception. Her answers, let's just say, they raised more questions than they answered. And now the legal firestorm is just getting started. This isn't just about a court case anymore. It's about power, influence, truth, and the unraveling of a Hollywood facade that's been carefully maintained for years. And Justin, he didn't have to say a word. His presence alone was enough to upend the story. Blake thought she was still writing. The internet is already exploding. Reporters are scrambling. PR teams are in crisis mode. And the full truth, the one they never wanted the public to see, is finally cracking through. If you thought this battle was cooling down, think again, because today was a turning point. A moment that might go down in entertainment legal history. And we're breaking down everything that happened from inside the courtroom to the ripple effects already tearing through Hollywood. This is your full story, unfiltered, unspun, and unfolding in real time. Let's dive in. The early hours outside the Los Angeles Superior Court were anything but routine. While the courthouse had seen its share of high-profile appearances, today's energy felt different. News vans began assembling before sunrise. Legal analysts whispered into microphones, cameras focused on every tinted SUV that pulled up, and fans of both celebrities watched live streams in anticipation. But when Justin Baldoni stepped out onto the courthouse steps, calm, composed, and deliberate, everything stopped. It wasn't just that he showed up, it was how he showed up. No entourage, no legal team shadowing him, no visible security. Just Justin dressed in a slate gray suit, crisp white shirt open at the collar, no tie, a look that was calculated, symbolic, and powerful. It was a move no one expected, and yet somehow it felt inevitable. The courtroom drama between him and Blake Lively had been simmering for months, with depositions, leaked filings, and media leaks fueling speculation. But this was the moment it all became real. For weeks, Blake Lively's attorneys had attempted to keep the deposition closed. They argued it was too sensitive, that the public attention could compromise safety and privacy. But a judge ruled against full closure, opting for a partial seal, allowing some aspects of the deposition to be disclosed under court supervision. That partial exposure meant a window of opportunity for Baldoni to witness the proceedings, and he took it. As he passed through security, Justin nodded to a few reporters without stopping. His face gave nothing away. Inside the courtroom, however, his presence had an immediate effect. Multiple sources close to the legal teams reported that Blake Lively appeared noticeably rattled when she learned he was there. She arrived just minutes after him, shielded by a team of attorneys, with Reynolds nowhere in sight. That absence raised eyebrows. While Reynolds had been heavily involved behind the scenes, funding legal defenses, consulting with PR firms, and even making subtle public statements, his decision to skip today's proceedings didn't go unnoticed. Some say it was strategic, others whispered it was fear. Either way, it left Blake more vulnerable than ever. The deposition began just after 10 a.m. And for the first hour, it was mostly procedural. Her lawyers objected repeatedly, trying to limit the scope of questioning. But Justin's legal team, though quiet, had come prepared, with folders full of time-stamped emails, prior statements, and redacted messages already authenticated through discovery. They were determined to hold the line. Blake was questioned under oath for nearly 5 hours, and while much of it is still under seal, sources with direct knowledge of the session confirmed that the line of questioning zeroed in on inconsistencies in Blake's prior public statements, particularly her interviews with Vogue, Vanity Fair, and a now controversial podcast appearance from earlier this year. In those interviews, she claimed she had no direct role in decisions related to her public legal countersuit, but today under oath her answers began to shift. At one point, one of the attorneys read aloud an internal memo allegedly written by Blake herself, referencing a meeting with crisis PR consultants and outlining a strategy to control narrative framing before Baldoni's claims escalate further. The courtroom fell silent. Blake asked for a recess. Her lawyer objected to the document's inclusion, but the judge allowed it under authenticated evidence rules. When proceedings resumed, the tone had changed. No longer was this a standard celebrity deposition. It was now clear that someone was keeping receipts. And Justin Baldoni from his seat near the back watched every moment. His silence spoke volumes. He never once tried to interfere. He didn't gesture. He didn't whisper to his attorneys. He simply watched, his gaze unwavering. Every time Blake hesitated, every time her attorneys huddled to advise her on phrasing, Baldoni remained still, as if daring her to speak truthfully, fully, and without filters. At one point during questioning, a name surfaced that no one had expected. According to a source with knowledge of the transcript, Blake was asked directly whether she had communicated about Baldoni's original lawsuit with any third-party media outlets before the suit went public. Her initial answer was vague, but when confronted with a subpoenaed text exchange between her and an unnamed entertainment journalist, her tone reportedly changed. The implication: someone may have tipped off the press, potentially to spin the narrative before the lawsuit ever had a chance to be heard fairly. Blake's legal team immediately objected, arguing relevance. The judge overruled. The exchange was entered into the record. Outside the courthouse, word began to spread. Reporters on social media started hinting that Blake had been visibly shaken during parts of her deposition. Twitter trends exploded. Hashtag Blake deposition, hashtag Baldoni appears, and hashtag courtroom drama shot to the top of trending lists. Within hours, news outlets from Variety to CNN had begun reporting on Baldoni's unexpected appearance and what it might signal for the next phase of the legal battle. Inside the courtroom, the final hour of questioning was reportedly the most intense. Blake was asked about her connection to a specific legal firm involved in countersuit strategies for several other public figures. That firm, while not named directly in court, had recently made headlines for being part of a similar strategy used by another high-profile celebrity facing defamation claims. The implication was clear. Was Blake part of a broader strategy, one that involved leveraging lawsuits, media leaks, and coordinated legal maneuvers to discredit claimants? Blake's team denied any coordinated efforts. But when asked if she had ever had contact with Brian Friedman, Baldoni's high-powered attorney, before the lawsuit, she hesitated. After a moment of silence, she replied briefly, through intermediaries. That admission set off a flurry of reactions. Courtroom observers exchanged glances, attorneys scribbled notes, and from the back of the courtroom, Justin Baldoni remained expressionless. But that moment was a turning point, a quiet admission that there had been contact, that something had passed between the camps before the public ever knew what was happening behind the scenes. By the time the deposition ended, reporters had already begun assembling outside the building. The word was out. This wasn't just about Justin attending Blake's deposition. It was about a shift in energy and momentum in the balance of power, in a case that had until now seemed like a tug-of-war between celebrity and credibility. As Blake exited the courthouse, flanked by her attorneys, no words offered to the press, Justin exited alone once again. He paused at the top of the courthouse steps. For a brief moment, he looked out across the crowd, the cameras, the flashes, the frenzy. And then he walked away, calm, silent, and absolutely in control. What happens next is anyone's guess. But one thing is certain: Blake's deposition has blown the case wide open. And Justin's quiet, deliberate presence today just added fuel to a fire that shows no signs of slowing down. The fallout from the deposition was immediate. Within hours of Justin Baldoni's silent appearance at the courthouse and Blake Lively's testimony under oath, media outlets scrambled to confirm details. Legal insiders whispered about inconsistencies, strategic pivots, and a growing sense that Blake's legal fortress might finally be cracking. But what really set the day apart wasn't just the deposition itself, it was the sense that the tide had begun to turn, slowly, unmistakably, and publicly. Inside the courthouse, as reporters began to confirm portions of Blake's responses, attorneys from both camps began preparing their next moves. For Justin's team, the deposition had delivered exactly what they needed: a set of on-record statements that, while not entirely explosive on the surface, opened the door for a deeper unraveling. And Blake's team, they now had to regroup, reassess, and reframe According to several legal analysts familiar with the case, Blake's answers raised more questions. Then they settled. Her admission that she had spoken to intermediaries who were in touch with Brian Friedman, the very lawyer representing Baldoni, left a trail of ambiguity that experts say could complicate any future claims of total ignorance or detachment from the case's early developments. More than that, Blake's defense strategy, which had until now relied heavily on presenting herself as a distanced, uninvolved figure, more observer than participant, began to fray. Her demeanor during the deposition, as described by multiple sources, ranged from composed to flustered, particularly during sections that delved into internal communications and outside media coordination. In one segment, she was presented with a timeline that included her appearance on a red carpet just days before legal notices were filed, during which she made comments many now consider deeply strategic in hindsight. The questioning led by one of Baldoni's more seasoned attorneys was methodical. They didn't try to shock Blake. They didn't badger or attack. Instead, they simply laid out the record dates, events, published quotes, and private messages, and gave her space to respond. It was that restraint, ironically, that created the most tension in the room. As one observer put it, they weren't trying to destroy her, they were inviting her to tell the truth, and that's what made her pause. Behind the scenes, it's now being reported that Baldoni's legal team had spent weeks preparing for this deposition, not because they expected a bombshell, but because they knew the cracks in Blake's narrative would emerge if the right questions were asked in the right way, and it worked. One moment in particular sent shockwaves through the legal gallery. When asked whether she was aware of a coordinated effort to discredit Justin through online commentary and social media influencers, Blake denied direct involvement. But when shown a list of creators who had posted nearly identical talking points, some of whom were later revealed to be managed by firms previously contracted by Blake's team, she responded, "I don't manage public reaction." It wasn't a denial, it wasn't a confirmation, it was a pivot, and a legally cautious one. But in that moment, observers noted a visible shift in the room. One source present during the deposition said Justin's attorney glanced toward him briefly. Justin nodded barely perceptibly. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Commentators across YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter began dissecting every detail. The phrase "I don't manage public reaction" began trending within minutes, drawing comparisons to past high-profile cases, where similar phrases were used to deflect accountability without explicitly denying involvement. Even more compelling was the reaction from within the entertainment industry. Quietly, talent reps, studio executives, and PR teams began taking stock. If Blake's deposition ended up being as revealing in transcripts as the whispers suggested, it could fundamentally reshape her positioning in upcoming projects. Already, one studio reportedly paused discussions about a potential role for Lively in a major franchise reboot, not because of guilt or innocence, but because of optics. And then there's Justin. His calculated silence throughout the entire day had a ripple effect that extended far beyond the courthouse. While Blake's camp worked overtime to minimize the damage, Justin's appearance was beginning to be seen as a masterstroke in legal theater. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone reminded everyone involved, the judge, the lawyers, the media, and perhaps Blake herself, that he was no longer hiding behind filings, he was standing up. Later that evening, as footage of Blake exiting the courthouse aired on primetime television, eagle-eyed viewers caught something unusual. Her lead attorney appeared to whisper something to her just before they reached the press line. And for a moment, Blake stopped, turned slightly toward the cameras, and then looked away. It wasn't a statement, but it felt like one, a hesitation, a shift, a moment of recalibration. Inside legal circles, that moment was being interpreted as a signal, possibly, that Blake's team is considering mediation again. Previously, both sides had rejected settlement talks, holding firm to their positions. But now, with deposition testimony on record and more questions than answers emerging, mediation may no longer be optional. But let's step back for a moment. What exactly does Justin Baldoni gain by attending a deposition? What legal or strategic value does it add? According to legal experts, the answer is multifaceted. First, it demonstrates confidence. Defendants rarely show up to depositions of their accusers unless they believe the testimony may directly support their case or reveal contradictions. Second, it sends a signal not just to the opposing party, but to the court that the defendant is actively involved, aware, and unwilling to be sidelined. And third, it's a public relations move, but one rooted in authenticity. Unlike orchestrated media interviews or carefully worded statements, attending a deposition is a raw, risky, unscripted act. If anything had gone off the rails, if Blake had produced new evidence or caught Baldoni in a lie, he would have had to sit through it all. The fact that he still showed up suggests a quiet confidence that many in the legal world say speaks volumes. In contrast, Blake's strategy is becoming increasingly difficult to decode. Her team has denied coordinated media campaigns, disavowed influencer involvement, and downplayed her public comments, all while the evidence continues to hint at a different story. If nothing else, her deposition showed that the narrative is no longer fully in her control. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the legal chessboard is shifting. Justin's attorneys are expected to file several new motions in the coming weeks, many of which will rely directly on statements made during the deposition. One rumored filing involves a request to unseal previously redacted exhibits now that Blake has acknowledged their existence under oath. If granted, those exhibits could provide even more insight into the behind-the-scenes efforts to shape public perception, emails, drafts of public statements, and possibly even financial records related to media consultancy services, all of which could reshape how this case is viewed not just by the courts but by the industry at large. And the timing couldn't be more crucial. With award season approaching and several major productions in development, the stakes are higher than ever for both stars. Justin has continued working quietly, attaching himself to projects with social impact and a low media profile. Blake, on the other hand, has seen increased scrutiny on every public appearance, with some branding experts now suggesting that a full rebrand may be needed if the fallout continues. But perhaps the most telling detail of all came after the courthouse lights had dimmed. According to an unnamed court staffer, Justin Baldoni returned to the courthouse later that evening, not as a public figure but as a private citizen. He dropped off a sealed envelope with the court clerk addressed directly to the presiding judge. Its contents remain unknown, but the symbolism is clear. This is more than a court case. It's a reckoning, and Justin is far from done. The media coverage in the 24 hours after Blake Lively's deposition was nothing short of a storm. Every major entertainment outlet from Variety to TMZ ran headlines emphasizing not just the testimony itself but the unprecedented presence of Justin Baldoni inside the courtroom. It wasn't supposed to go this far, at least not this fast. Blake's team had banked on optics, control, and silence, but now those foundations were buckling, and fast. Inside Blake's inner circle, the mood had reportedly turned anxious. According to sources close to the case, what was supposed to be a routine legal formality ended up cracking open the narrative that had taken months of PR maneuvering to construct. And in Hollywood, image is everything. Public confidence, brand deals, and casting opportunities can vanish overnight when control of the story slips, even by a single degree, and that's exactly what was happening. What began as a private dispute between two A-list forces had now spilled over into public perception, institutional reputations, and a broader cultural discussion around accountability, power, and authenticity. Social media was flooded with viral commentary dissecting every detail of the deposition, from Blake's carefully worded pauses to the way Baldoni didn't speak at all. Hashtags like #Baldoni silence, #Blake under oath, and #Hollywood reckoning began trending across multiple platforms. Clips of news anchors replaying courtroom sketches of Baldoni sitting silently in the gallery were reshared millions of times, and in this new wave of coverage, one theme kept re-emerging: power is shifting. Legal experts were already calling Blake's deposition one of the most consequential of her career. Not because she collapsed on the stand, she didn't, and not because she admitted to direct wrongdoing, she didn't do that either, but because for the first time she was forced to answer questions she couldn't control. Without editing, without rehearsals, without a stylist or lighting or a talking points memo. This wasn't a Vogue cover or a red carpet event. This was real, raw, and legally binding, and it showed. Insiders say that as the deposition progressed, Blake's tone changed subtly. She started with firm, confident answers, prepared, almost scripted. But as documents were introduced and as messages were read aloud from prior months, the pauses became more frequent, her lawyer's objections increased, and by the final hour, her once polished composure had softened into something closer to hesitation, and still Justin remained seated in the back. Observers said he never once took out his phone, never whispered to his counsel, never even shifted in his chair unless absolutely necessary. His presence was steady, unmoved, an anchor of intention in a room full of tension. And everyone saw it, including Blake. Some speculated that his appearance was designed to trigger just that, an emotional reaction, but those close to Baldoni insist that wasn't the point. According to one confidant, Justin's presence wasn't about intimidation, it was about accountability. A quiet reminder that behind every legal strategy and press release there's a human being on the other side, and that reminder hit hard. In a stunning turn late that same evening, an anonymous whistleblower from inside a boutique PR firm, allegedly tied to Lively's media advisors, leaked a draft of a prepared talking points memo. The document, dated just days before the deposition, appeared to outline response narratives depending on how the testimony unfolded. Among the suggested approaches were phrases like "Blake bravely tells her truth," and any inconsistencies were misinterpretations, not malice. The leak hit social media like a lightning strike. Commentators accused the team of preparing for damage control before any damage was even done, a move many considered calculated, even cynical. The implication was clear: this wasn't about truth. It was about staying ahead of the headlines, controlling fallout, spinning a story. And if anything had already been made clear by Justin's attendance at the deposition, it was that he wasn't playing by those rules anymore. Meanwhile, legal circles began bracing for what could come next: the unsealing of Blake's full transcript. Though only select portions had been confirmed by sources, pressure was mounting for more transparency. Several outlets filed motions requesting access to transcripts and exhibits, citing public interest and the growing national conversation about celebrity accountability. A decision on those motions is expected within days. Back at Blake's camp, the response was quiet. No public statement, no interview, no friendly magazine cover to reclaim the narrative. Her team went dark digitally and strategically, which for some said more than words ever could. When a PR machine suddenly powers down, the silence is deafening. Hollywood began taking notice. A prominent director reportedly postponed a meeting with Blake's agents. A brand partnership rumored to involve a major lifestyle campaign was quietly shelved. Studios, brands, and agencies were watching and waiting. No one wanted to be caught investing in an image that might collapse under the weight of unsealed truth. But while Blake's camp scrambled behind the scenes, Baldoni's remained composed. His attorneys declined to comment publicly, but multiple insiders revealed that the team has already identified 3 key excerpts from the deposition that they plan to cite in upcoming motions. One involves Blake's answers surrounding the timeline of events, another relates to her interactions with third-party media agents, and the most explosive, a segment in which she refers vaguely to a mutual understanding between unnamed parties about limiting reputational exposure. The language is vague but legally rich. That phrase alone, limiting reputational exposure, could become the centerpiece of Baldoni's argument that coordinated suppression of facts and misrepresentation of narratives were at play from the beginning. If proven, that changes everything. In a broader cultural sense, the case was now shifting from personal conflict to systemic examination. Media personalities began drawing comparisons to previous celebrity legal battles, some rooted in defamation, others in image rehabilitation, and in nearly all those cases, it was the record that decided the outcome, not charisma, not fame, not red carpet history, but documents, dates, timelines, truth. And as much as Blake Lively had cultivated an image of control, elegance, and careful precision throughout her career, those very traits were now being scrutinized through a different lens. Was her narrative too perfect? Was the PR too polished? Were the media appearances too conveniently timed? The public, for its part, was split. While many longtime fans rallied behind her with hashtags of support, others expressed disappointment, feeling they had been misled or manipulated. The emotional weight of celebrity loyalty was being tested, and not everyone was staying. Through it all, one person remained conspicuously absent from public view: Reynolds. His absence at the deposition raised questions, and now his continued silence was fueling speculation. Was he staying out of legal matters intentionally, or was there concern about what his own involvement might eventually reveal? So far, no comment had been issued on his behalf. But what couldn't be ignored was that this was no longer just a legal case. It had become a cultural one. A referendum on the boundaries of celebrity influence, the ethics of reputation management, and the cost of attempting to rewrite reality through public narrative. And at the center of it, silently but steadily, stood Justin Baldoni. His quiet appearance in that courtroom had changed everything, not with a speech, not with a statement, but with presence. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is show up unflinching. While truth unfolds around them, the next chapter in this case is coming quickly. With depositions concluded, the court now turns to pretrial motions and the possible unsealing of critical evidence. Legal observers predict a wave of new filings, potential witness subpoenas, and possibly even third-party depositions involving individuals tied to media coordination efforts. And all of that stems from one simple moment: the day Justin Baldoni walked into Blake Lively's deposition and didn't blink. So now here we are at the end of one of the most explosive days in this already explosive legal battle. A day that may be remembered not for shouting matches or viral meltdowns, but for what it exposed in its quietest moments. Justin Baldoni didn't need to speak. He didn't need to testify. He didn't even need to gesture. His decision to walk into Blake Lively's deposition was enough to shift the entire tone of the case, sending shockwaves through not only the courtroom but the entire Hollywood ecosystem. This wasn't just about law, this was about leverage, this was about pressure, and most of all this was about power and how it shifts when truth begins to break through carefully controlled silence. Blake Lively came into that room with a legal team, months of PR groundwork, and the assumption that this would be just another box to check. But by the time she walked out, visibly tense, flanked by lawyers and hounded by reporters, it was clear that something had changed. Her answers under oath are now locked into the record. The contradictions have been noted, the timelines are being dissected, and her public image, once seen as unshakable, is beginning to tremble at the edges. And what happens next? That's the question everyone in the entertainment industry, legal community, and social media world is now asking. Will Blake's deposition trigger the unsealing of key evidence? Will more subpoenas follow? Perhaps even to those within her own PR or media strategy teams. Will Justin's attorneys move for sanctions or press harder in discovery now that new inconsistencies are on the record? Or could this be the moment where talks of settlement return to the table, now with a completely different balance of power? Either way, the damage is done. Blake Lively can no longer hide behind silence or strategy. Her testimony is now a part of legal history. And Justin Baldoni, once dismissed by some as being too quiet, too soft, or too idealistic, has proven that resolve and presence can speak louder than any headline ever could. This story isn't over. In fact, it may just be entering its most dangerous phase yet, because now the stakes aren't just about two celebrities fighting in court. Now it's about how far powerful people are willing to go to shape their own narrative. And what happens when someone refuses to let that narrative stand unchallenged? The courtroom battle is far from over. The public is more engaged than ever. And as the pressure rises and the secrets keep leaking, one thing is clear: the truth is no longer buried. And no matter how many lawyers or headlines try to cover it up, it's coming to light, one sworn statement at a time.